Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Tom Murphy Show. Tonight we have a special guest, a person who's known very well throughout the community, State Senator George Latimer. George, thanks for appearing tonight.
Tom, always great to be with you.
Thanks, George. Always nice to have you. Let me ask you a question, George, just right off the bat. Albany just passed the budget. Tell me about that process and the highlights and the lowlights, if there were.
Well, the process was awful. The end product is defensible because there are certain elements of it that I think worked well. But the process, continues to sort of reflect the dysfunction, Tom, that you've heard talked about for all these years. I've been at Albany a little more than 10 years. And the spring when I first ran for the State Assembly in 2004, the Brennan Center proclaimed that Albany was the most dysfunctional government in the country. And if you judge the way we go about doing things, there's no change. Meaning that negotiations go on between leaders of the Senate, leaders of the Assembly, and the governor, 3 men or their staffs in a room. Those who are not in majority status don't have much input. Those who are junior members of the majority in both houses don't really have that much input. The negotiations end up with budgets that stuff disparate issues together in one bill. So when you vote yes on something, you're voting yes on every element of it, which opens the door for
even when you don't like something.
That you have to swallow poison pills, which, by the way, become the campaign fodder, later in the year. And then also inability to do any amendment on the floor, so you can't change it when you're hearing it. And of course, for those of us in the minority status, and this is the path that Susie Oppenheimer had to experience for 28 years when she was a senator. Almost all of her years, she was in the minority. You get the bill at the last minute. We had an overnight session to adopt the budget. So at 2 in the morning, you get a bill that you're going to vote on at 3 in the morning, which is nobody's idea of intelligent legislators. So the process itself, which really is designed to let the majority party control as much as they can the dynamics to pass whatever it is they agree upon, is terrible. The end product of the budget, though, had some elements in it that I think were defensible, as I've said. And it's an amalgam of things. Overall, the budget is $155 billion in rounded numbers. That's a 2.3% increase in spending over the prior year, which would be about $152 billion. Depending on how you count money that comes from the federal government that passes through the state, so you might get some different numbers, with slight variation. In general terms, over $50 billion of the budget goes for health care spending. Over $30 billion of it goes for education spending. So
healthcare, we're talking about Medicaid?
Medicaid is the biggest piece of it, but there's other elements of the health care spending. But mostly Medicaid, health care to the indigent, long-term health care is the biggest single part of the health budget. And in the education budget, K-12 education assistance, what the state provides to local school districts, less to the Mamaroneck's and the Rhinecks of the world, and the Rye Cities and the Scarsdales of the world, and more for the Yonkers and the New York Cities of the world because they're the urban poor districts around the state. You wind up over $30 billion in that area. So those 2 areas drive the train. The state budget itself is actually broken into 10 different votes and 10 different pieces. One piece is health and mental health. One piece is education and some other categories attached to it.
So 10 separate votes?
10 separate votes that make it up. You could vote yes or no on each one of those segments, but usually when it comes to the floor, the majority side has made a commitment to vote for these things, so the votes are there for it. Probably the biggest things that are in the budget in terms of content. There's a middle-class tax cut that's been agreed upon. It's a reduction in the percentage that you would pay in state income tax, scaled over the next 8 years, that will take you from sort of a mid-6% range down to 5.5% if you fall in a certain category, $40,000 a year to $149,000 a year just to gross income. If you're $150 to $300 a year, you get a reduction from 6.65 to 6. All of that is sort of the details of it, but the bottom line is there's a state income tax cut that's phased in, so that's a good thing. And it's argued to be a middle-class tax cut, although there's a range of incomes that it affects. We have more money for state education this year than we've had in any past budget, over $25 billion. Now, the allocation of that money is different depending on district. So if we were being watched all across Westchester County, there are some school districts that did very well because of their need or their circumstances, and some that did not do as well. The most important element of that is we made the final restoration of money that we cut 6 years ago in the gap elimination adjustment, which was put into place 2010.
During budget problems.
Yeah, the Great Recession affected the state budget revenues as it did everybody else. We had a $10 billion gap. So I know, you start to lose people when you get all this deep in the weeds, but the bottom line is that the education funding this year was good. Is it enough? No, because there's still unmet needs. And because you have a tax cap on school districts as well as municipal governments, the local districts can't easily raise revenue from any other source. So the state aid reliance becomes more important, and that's a problem.
I just want to touch upon that because I know you're on record of being against the tax cap, and I'm, violently on record about being against the tax cap. You see it in ways. It affects how people budget now, local municipalities. Right. So and people are budgeting for the cap and not budgeting for need.
Right.
And sooner or later, this is going to catch up to us.
I think it's catching up with us already. And let me just say that at the time that the tax cap came through in 2011, when I voted against it, the argument was made that there would be robust mandate relief from state mandates that would accompany it. Had that mandate relief occurred, I would have voted for the tax cap.
Exactly.
But what we did is we capped what you could raise for obvious reasons. We all pay high property taxes. We all want to see them reduced. I do, you do, we all do. Anybody who pays property taxes does. But if you want to starve the police services in your community, if you want to starve the sanitation pickup, and then, as I think you've alluded to, bad public policy has come out of this. You have one community abolishes the fire department. Another community, now when you park in their town, the meters go until 11 o'clock at night.
Exactly.
You buy a tennis permit, triple the cost.
Yep.
All these little things are because the revenue stream isn't sufficient to run the government. Now, if the state, which I've advocated for, and I've all the bills I could point out that if the state would do 5, 6, 7 key mandate relief elements, then you in a town government, in a village government, you'd have the wherewithal to be able to meet your needs without having to raise property taxes and without having to cut things to the bone.
Just may I suggest one? As you know, school districts don't have to count their capital costs against the cap, but municipalities like the Village of Larchmont, the Village of Mamaroneck, the Town of Mamaroneck, people who are watching here, we have to count that.
Right.
If that could be excluded, all of us are going to have a huge expense redoing our sewers, and it's going to boost everybody's taxes, and there's no way around it. It just has to be done. As you know, if the sewer system breaks down, before long civilization breaks down.
Well, and all of those services. When you talk about from a town perspective or from a village, either of the two villages that are watching this locally, you go through the winter season, you come out into where we are now, and you have road issues. You have roads that need to be repaired. And people complain bitterly about them, and sometimes, you pop a tire, you could even crack an axle on the wrong kind of a pothole. Those things have to be repaired. They have to be repaired quickly so that you don't wind up having a worse problem. And and then you turn to the government. And if the government is strapped for money, you're not able to do that. On the other hand, what I would say is, we make the town government pay for the MTA payroll tax. There's no reason for you to pay the MTA payroll tax. That should be paid for, in a different fashion. And if we did, I don't know what it means in the town, maybe $50,000. $50,000 is not nothing. It's not nothing. And $50,000 on a road is going to fix a couple roads with that kind of money. Exactly. So the bottom line is that in the state budget, we did include some more money for highway improvements and CHIPS. In general, for state-related purposes, meaning the MTA and the state DOT highways and roads, which do affect some of the roads that you and I drive on in this area. Weaver Street's a state road. US 1 is a state. Post Road is a state road. The Thruway itself is a state road. But we allocated $55 million in aid for the various municipalities and capital, and that's going to help us a great deal. We put aside $400 million in aid for sewer and water repairs. Now, we have sewer treatment plants that are done through the county by districts, but the bottom line is if you're a ratepayer and you live in Larchmont or Mamaroneck, whatever district you're in, that cost is going to go up based on what you're facing. So there's a number of those things that were in the budget. By the way, I misspoke. It's billion, not million.
Oh, okay.
$55 billion in the aid. I just caught that. I said million. And there's some other examples of it. But if you ride the trains every day into New York City, you can tell that there is capital improvements that are needed in the MTA system. Sure. And then Lord knows in the subway and bus system. So we've made some intelligent investments in the budget. That's why I say in general it's defensible. There's some things about the budget I did not like. There's been a change made to the STAR program, which will only affect those people that move to a different housing situation from year over year. But it's going to take what is an upfront subsidy and turn it into a tax credit that you would claim on your state income tax. And for seniors who are on Enhanced Star, that could be a cash flow issue. That could be pretty serious. It merits a longer explanation. Anybody who may be watching this is welcome to call my district office.
So they won't be
and
sending
explain
out checks. You'll be getting it off your taxes.
It'll be a reduction that you take off of your income tax, your state income tax when you file it. And there's also a time lag, because under normal circumstances, you're getting a reduction in the bill that you receive twice a year in the current year. Now the money that you would have reduced now, you will claim next year when you file your taxes. So there is a time lag. It works nicely for the state administration, but it doesn't work nicely for the individual.
Okay.
So that was something that I spoke out against, but that was part of the budget that got passed.
Let's just talk about it. I know you've introduced bills dealing with ethics reform in Albany, and I know other members of both parties have introduced bills. But yet we're stymied, nothing goes anywhere. I mean, how do we get past this?
Well, it's very hard to, it's very hard to get past it. The fundamental problem is that you have people at the top of the pyramid who got to the top of the pyramid, leadership positions under the existing system. And they know how to raise money within this system. They know they have now power that they can wield, and they're not of a mind to want to give it up. And so when a news entity says, well, Albany is unwilling to do such and such and such, let me tell you that there's lots of rank and file members that are more than prepared to do it, but the leadership will bottle up these bills. First of all, I think we need to have pension forfeiture put into place, attached to those of us in the public elected positions. If we commit a job-related felony, we should be in a situation where we potentially forfeit our pension. Why? Not as much to punish, but as to deter, to make the penalty so great that you wouldn't do this to your kids.
Right. You know what? Because people see, elected leaders who have served a long time, and they go to jail and they get $90,000 a year pension, and it creates resentment. Normally,
absolutely. I mean, look, if you're
understandably,
if you're in the private sector and you've done something that requires you mandates your firing, you get nothing.
Exactly.
You get shown the door and in a hurry.
Yeah.
So that's clearly something we need. I think we need to plug some of the campaign financing loopholes. The biggest one is the ability for limited liability corporations, LLCs, to act as independent donors when in fact they're part of a tree of organizations led by one person. That's the source of money that led to both Silver and Skelos' downfall, and that's the loophole that the big players want to plug the least. I think we have to look at outside income and determine that there's some limits to that. Now,
and disclosure of that.
Well, disclosure of it, but then also I think limits too, because the amount of conflicts that can occur.
Sure.
Now, neither you and I are lawyers, and that's the predominant occupation, the largest of all the occupations of members of the legislature. But if I'm part of a law firm, and my law firm somehow benefits by dealing with a client, even if I don't personally interact with it, so it's not a personal conflict of interest for me, that's a negative, and I think that's got to be addressed as part of this. And with all of these things, right now the legislators, many of my colleagues, not all of them, are clamoring for an increase in pay. Haven't had an increase in pay in 19 years or some long period of time. But I've said as one legislator, and Lord knows I'm of relatively modest means compared to the areas that you and I live in. The bottom line is there should be no pay increase until all these reforms are put into place. You cannot reward, if that's what this is, you cannot reward somebody or compensate them if they haven't performed. And we haven't performed in terms of tackling these ethical issues.
And I think that's a good point, because you know what? If people don't trust the system, they don't trust the outcome. Even if there is a good outcome, they'll always think that there was more to the story. And I'm just finished reading this book, Dark Money, and it deals more with federal money. Right. But it's truly scary in America today how billionaires and corporate interests can give as much money to they want, and not only do they give money to candidates back to us, but what they do is they fund these policy organizations that put out these policy papers that most of the time aren't true, but it protects their point of view, and that insidiously gets into the body politic. You hear people quoting stuff that the Heritage Foundation put out, but then when people look at it, it's not scientifically true. And